Hello and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be showing you this drawing of Liv Tyler as Arwen from the Lord of the Rings movies. Some people asked me if I could do a few more drawings inspired by Tolkien, Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. So here it is. I was actually planning to do this one for a while, but I couldn't decide on the reference photo because I had a couple of images from the movie with her in this nice robe and hood, but in most of them the horse was obscuring either a part of the clothes or her face. So I kind of patched up a couple of different reference photos and this was what I came up with. And now I'm going to be showing you the drawing process. Let's have a look. So we're going to have a little bit of background here, and it's not going to be very elaborate or detailed, it's just going to be some suggestions of trees. So a dark blurry background, and I'm going to do that with vine charcoal. So I'm using a vine charcoal stick here, and I'm going to be covering everything in the background with it. I've talked about the properties of vine charcoal many times in many of my previous drawings. And it can be very easily manipulated and moved around, because when you apply it to the surface of the paper, it doesn't really stick. It just kind of sits on top of the surface of the paper, and you have to push it in order for it to stay. So I'm covering all of this very carelessly, and I don't really care what it looks like at this stage because I'm going to be blending everything anyway. I'm going to be using my finger to push the vine charcoal around now and to blend it, and the trick that I like to use is to vary the amount of pressure and also not lift up my finger to allow for smoother blending. And the other thing that I'm going to be using is combining this vine charcoal with some compressed charcoal. So I sharpened my charcoal pencil to put down a little bit of that charcoal dust to create some of these darker areas, these vertical shapes, which will be my trees, because she's riding through a forest and I want to have some suggestions of trees in the background and I want some variation in the value. But the other reason why I wanted this background is because I need some contrast between the background and the lighter parts of her hood, or the highlights of her hood, because the light is coming from above and we have to clean up these highlights, and I'm using a kneaded eraser for this. But the other important thing here is that I need to have a clean edge there, and the way to achieve a clean edge is to blend with a brush so that the tip of the brush is pointing towards the edge, which is what I'm doing now. I'm standing on the left side of the drawing and I'm pushing the charcoal to the edge of that hood, and that way I can get a clean edge. So now I'm moving on to the hair and the hood. And I'm going to be first framing the face by drawing some of these darker areas and filling them in using my woodless charcoal pencil. My main drawing tools for this drawing, as usual, will be woodless charcoal pencils, a medium one and a soft one. The medium one is a little bit harder and holds the tip a little bit better, allows me for these thinner lines, and the softer one allows me to create even darker areas of darker value because it's a little bit darker than the medium one. Now I'm working on the hair here. She has a middle parting and I have to follow the direction of the hair. So I'm making tapered one-directional strokes here and connecting them in the middle. But the thing is that all of this starts to look a lot better once you start blending it with a brush, because once you go over it with a brush, all of these lines become softer and the hair kind of gets more volume and it becomes thicker. And then if I feel like I need to pull some highlights on top of that, I can do that with a pencil eraser. Now I used a soft charcoal pencil just to go over some of these areas to make them a little bit darker. And I blended that in as well. And now, as you can see, I'm using a pencil eraser to pull some highlights on top. So now I'm going to be moving on to the face and the eyebrows. I'm drawing the eyelashes and the eyes using a sharp medium charcoal pencil. Oh, and by the way, I said that my main drawing tools are these woodless charcoal pencils, and by the way, for the pupils I'm using a soft charcoal pencil because I want that to be one of the darkest areas on my drawing. Anyway, like I said, these are my main drawing tools, but I'm going to be using other stuff as well. You can see that I'm using a variety of blending tools, not only these brushes but also my finger and tortillons and all kinds of stuff. Here I'm using a fine tortillon with a fine tip that was rolled into a fine tip to blend some areas around the eye where I need some more precision. And I also occasionally use a Q-tip for some softer blending on the skin and things like that. But in addition to these pencils, I'm also using other types of pencils. I'm using graphite pencils and black colored pencils as well, so it's not all charcoal, and I like to use mixed media, but you have to know the properties of the pencils that you're using in order to combine them so that the drawing looks good, both in real life and here on the video. And I'm also using several different types of brushes, some of them when I need to push the charcoal into the paper a little bit more, and some of them when I need to blend the charcoal very gently. And of course, like I said, I did most of the background, and I'm going to be doing most of the work on her clothes with vine charcoal because vine charcoal is good for that. If you want to learn how to draw, if you want to learn some basics and you're looking for something that's really cheap and easy to work with, the first thing that I would suggest is naturally a graphite pencil. But the second thing that could be pretty useful, especially for those people who are not very patient but like to be able to produce these darker tones very quickly, is vine charcoal. Vine charcoal is a great drawing tool, and it's also great for drawing studies and for practicing. But in a combination with some other types of pencils, like for example woodless charcoal pencils, which is what I often use, you can produce some very nice looking and very realistic looking drawings. So as you can see, now I'm going to be working on the face. And I often talked about how I actually find drawing young women more challenging than drawing some other types of portraits because it's not always easy to show the shape of their face because some of these transitions are very smooth. I think that naturally when you're trying to draw a realistic face or any realistic looking object, you have to keep in mind that there has to be contrast in value and that you need to have edges, but some of the edges are clean, like the edge that I'm trying to achieve between the background and her hood. But some other edges are kind of blurry, and in some cases you have some very, very soft transitions between one shape and the other. And female faces, the faces of younger women, especially attractive ones like Liv Tyler, are full of these smooth transitions, and if you don't get them right, you will often fail to achieve the likeness. So much of this drawing will actually be focused on shading the face, and don't be surprised if it's a very, very slow, gradual process to get there, because it's going to take a while. In case you're wondering what this whole drawing took in real time, I think I didn't record all of it on camera, but I have about 4 hours of footage, I think. So it may have been 4.5 hours, maybe more, maybe even 5 hours of drawing. I think I recorded most of it on camera, so it was probably around 4.5 hours with a little bit of tweaking and measuring off camera, but it's a fair amount of time. And one of the things that I like to do is make a lot of short breaks, often because I have to, because I have other things to do naturally, but also because I think it's always good to make a break, especially when you're drawing portraits, especially challenging ones. It's often a good idea to step away from your drawing and maybe reassess it later when you've gotten some needed rest. And in case you want to see the real-time video of this drawing, you can find that on my Patreon. For a small monthly amount, you can see many of my videos in real time, along with some other stuff. So I'm still shading the face and gradually building up the value using a combination of charcoal and some other pencils. This area here under the neck and around the hood on the right is going to be darker, and now I'm covering the neck and the area around it with vine charcoal. And you can see that this area seems very dark now, like I overdid it a little bit, but you'll see that once I shade everything around it and once I finish shading the face, it's actually not going to be dark at all. When you're shading, a lot of these things are relative. An area can appear very dark until you shade the area around it, and then you find that you need even more value in that place. I'm going to try to leave that highlight on the tip of her nose and on the forehead, but if I cover it accidentally, I'll just clean it up with an eraser. I was kind of struggling with her mouth a little bit to get the shape right, so you're going to see me going over it and going back to it multiple times to adjust the certain details and just modify the shape a little bit. But the thing is that the appearance of the mouth depends a lot, not just on the mouth itself and the lips, but also how you shade the area around it, and I've only begun working on that process. So if you hear some background noises like the furniture moving and things like that, it's just my retarded neighbors. My conditions for working and recording are less than ideal. I've done most of the left side of the face, or her right, and now moving on to the right side, and I kind of feel like I'm not getting enough value, so I keep trying to add a little more. And I'm using the soft synthetic brush to blend that, and I'm trying to avoid creating texture as much as possible. Because I want the skin to look really smooth. I went over the eyes very quickly, so I just want to say a few words about those as well. So we have a couple of very nice highlights or reflections in her eyes. So to achieve those, I've already made a few videos on that as well. But the key is to make sure that everything around them is a lot darker, and when we have that contrast, these highlights stand out, these reflections stand out really nice. So you have to shade the rest of the eye properly, and even though the whites of the eye appear white to us, they have to be shaded as well. And another thing that I often talked about that I like to do is, if the reflection is covering much of the pupil, you just move it to the side a little bit, and that way you can retain that nice contrast between the pupil and the iris and that reflection, that highlight. As you can see, I've moved on to this robe and the hood, and I'm naturally using my vine charcoal to establish some mid-tone, and then I'm going to work on top of that with some compressed charcoal and some other stuff, and naturally erasers to pull some highlights and things like that. But even though this is obviously a lot simpler than drawing the face, it's still going to take a little bit of time and effort, because I kept going over some of these areas, and because vine charcoal is so easy to move, they just kept getting lighter and lighter, so eventually I had to add a little bit more of that compressed charcoal from my woodless charcoal pencils on top, so that I could finally get this to be as dark as I wanted. I need to show these folds. I need to make them look realistic. Now at this point I decided that my background wasn't dark enough, that I wasn't getting enough contrast, so I decided to add a little bit more of charcoal powder, which I created by sharpening my soft charcoal pencil. And I used a large brush to blend that in. And if I happen to spoil some of my edges, I'm just gonna clean them up again. But I just needed a little bit more of these darker values in the background. The background was a little bit too flat, and I just wasn't getting enough contrast with that hood and with my subject in the foreground, so I added a little bit more value, and hopefully this allowed me to create a little more depth in my drawing. So a range of value is very, very important. I talked about that a lot in my videos. And obviously I'm not perfect, and neither are my drawings. Sometimes I just fail to create a sufficient range of value. Sometimes I just fail to see the amount of value that I need in certain areas, but that's because humans are not machines. And I'm not a super experienced artist, so all of these videos are a learning process for me as well, each and every one of them. So I'm putting down some finishing touches on this left side of the robe and the hood, and cleaning up the edges and adding in some of the highlights so that these folds would stand out a little bit more. And I'm doing a little bit of shading on top with a black colored pencil, and maybe adding a little bit of texture. And after that I'm going to be moving on to the rest of her clothes, and I have a couple more details to take care of. I have that brooch which is shaped either like a butterfly or a pin, I'm not really sure, or a butterfly or a flower, I'm not really sure, but I'm going to do my best to make it look good without actually spending too much time working on it. So I decided to do that with a black colored pencil because I need more precision. And I'm gonna have to try to create areas of high contrast so that it looks like a shiny metallic object. But the thing is that I can't really make out all of the details in my reference photo, so I'm gonna have to improvise a little bit and simplify certain things. That's one of the pieces of advice that I always give when drawing clothes. Try to simplify whenever you can, or even avoid drawing too many details. I know that sometimes it's unavoidable, but a lot of times it's just a waste of time. But here I wanted to include this detail, so I'm doing my best to make it look good. Naturally, I'm going to shade the area around it so that it stands out. And here I'm sketching out the rest of the hood on the right, and doing more shading with my vine charcoal. I'm gonna have to finish that background as well before I move on to finishing that hood, because I'm gonna want to have a clean edge there as well. I'm gonna want to have some more highlights on the right as well. But I'm putting in some of these darker areas with a charcoal pencil. So I want these darker areas in place first, and then I can go over that with vine charcoal. These are some of the darkest areas in between the folds where there is less light, so they're almost black, some of them. So now I covered almost all of it with vine charcoal, and now the top of the hood looks kind of crappy, but I'm going to clean it up. I'm going to clean that up with an eraser, so it's going to be better. I'm going to clean up those edges. Not everything can be done at once. It's a slow process, gradual process, and it takes a little bit of time and patience, which is not one of my virtues, but I guess sometimes I just have to push myself to be patient and to make sure that I do things in proper order. But charcoal sure is helping my drawing style, because I'm not a big fan of precision and I like to work fast. Charcoal allows me to do that. But when I do want some more precision and when I do want some finer details, I can always combine charcoal with some other types of pencils. Now I'm doing the same thing here on the right that I did on the left. I'm adding in some compressed charcoal to create some darker areas in the background, to create some suggestions of trees, because I want some variation in the background, and I also want some more contrast with my subject to create more depth and to make everything look a little more 3D. But now I'm going to be doing some more work on the hood and the robe. and cleaning up some of these details. Again, I'm back working on the face a little bit, just refining some of the shading I did, refining some of the details like the shape of the mouth and the areas around the neck and things like that, and just cleaning up some edges overall in various parts of my drawing. I'm doing a little more shading on the eyes. Like I said, sometimes you have to step back from your drawing to see if the larger values, the larger shapes are in place. And if I feel like I need to add a little bit more shading and a little bit more value in some of these places, I can always do that later. But naturally you can go on with this indefinitely. Eventually you have to put the pencil down, but like I said, I'm not going to do that until I'm happy with how the portrait looks. Sometimes it can be a little bit difficult for me to decide where to place my signature, but here I think I can put it down here in the lower right corner. So there it is. The drawing's finished, by the way. I removed the tape and sprayed it with some fixative. I think it looks good. So that's another drawing of Arwen. I did one before. I'm gonna put the link in the description and in the end screen eventually. And I zoomed in a little bit so that you can see the face and the eyes a little bit better. I'm going to zoom out and move it around a little bit so that you can see the whole drawing. By the way, the size is 9 × 12 inches. Let me know what you think in the comments. Do subscribe if you haven't already. Give me a like and check out my other videos. Also check out my Patreon if you want to see longer videos. And thank you for watching.